Park Jaya stood by the curb of the Seoul Grand Regency, her small basket of honey crackers feeling heavier than usual. At 8 years old, she was a ghost in pigtails, a part of the landscape that the men in sharp suits simply walked over. They didn't know about her mother, Soo Jin, or the Russian lullabies they sang together in their cramped basement flat. They didn't know she was the only person on the sidewalk who understood exactly what the tall guard, Lim Tae-sung, was whispering to the man in the long black coat. "When he opens the door," Tae-sung murmured in Russian, his eyes fixed on the black sedan. Jaya froze. The words were a jagged blade in the air. She looked at the car, then at the hotel's revolving glass doors. Inside, the most feared man in the city was checking his watch. She had less than 10 minutes to stop a ghost from becoming a corpse. 5:38 p.m. 22 minutes until the world changed. Seo Kang-joon stood in the penthouse suite, the silver streaks in his black hair catching the dying light of the Seoul sunset. At 47, he didn't believe in luck, he believed in systems. People were variables to be managed. Emotions were friction in a machine that needed to run perfectly. He adjusted his tailored cufflink. To the underworld, he was a titan. To himself, he was a mathematician of power. "The motorcade is idling, Chairman," a voice crackled through his earpiece. It was Baek Hyun-woo, his chief bodyguard. "I'm aware of the time, Hyun-woo," Kang-joon replied, his voice like dry ice. "I expect the perimeter to be clear. I have no patience for delays." "Everything is prepared, sir. Lim Tae-sung is at the vehicle now." 5:40 p.m. Kang-joon picked up his briefcase. His life was a series of timed movements. Leave the suite at 5:50. Step into the car at 6:00. By 6:05, he would be reviewing the quarterly shipments. He prided himself on this predictability. It was his greatest strength. He didn't know that downstairs, a little girl with a snack basket was currently being shoved aside by his security team. He didn't know that the predictability he cherished was the very thing that had allowed his enemies to time his death down to the second. 5:45 p.m. 15 minutes until impact. Kang-joon stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a silent, heavy thud. Seo Kang-joon did not believe in the soul. He believed in the stopwatch. At 5:48 p.m., the elevator descended from the Regency penthouse, a silent steel box cutting through the heart of his empire. Inside, Kang-joon stood perfectly centered, his reflection in the polished brass doors revealing a man carved from granite and silver. His tailored dark suit was a suit of armor, and his gaze, sharp as a surgical blade, remained fixed on the digital floor indicator. To the world outside, he was the silver-streaked lion, a predator who had consolidated the warring factions of the Korean underworld through sheer, calculated brutality. But to Kang-joon, he was merely a CEO of chaos. He governed by a singular, icy philosophy: predictability is power. If a man's schedule is flawless, his empire is untouchable. "The North Dock shipment was delayed by 4 minutes, Chairman," the voice of Young Min-kyu, his security analyst, crackled through the discreet earpiece. "4 minutes is a lifetime, Min-kyu," Kang-joon replied, his voice a low, melodic rasp that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Replace the dock foreman. I have no room for variables." He stepped out into the lobby at 5:50 p.m. sharp. The air seemed to chill as he moved. Staff bowed low, their spines curving in a synchronized wave of fear. He did not look at them. To Kang-joon, these people were not individuals, they were functions. The concierge was a door-opening mechanism. The guards were meat shields with credentials. Waiting at the glass exit was Baek Hyun-woo, his chief bodyguard. Hyun-woo's eyes scanned the street with the restless intensity of a hawk. "The motorcade is positioned, sir. Path is clear." Kang-joon nodded once, a gesture so precise it looked rehearsed. He stepped onto the sidewalk, the evening humidity of Seoul clinging to his skin like a shroud. 10 yards away, his black sedan sat idling, a heavy, armored beast waiting to swallow him whole. He saw Lim Tae-sung standing by the rear door, his expression as unreadable as a blank ledger. For a fleeting second, Kang-joon's gaze drifted toward the periphery, a blur of street vendors and commoners lingering near the hotel's edge. He saw a small girl in pigtails clutching a basket of crackers, her wide eyes locked onto his with an intensity that should have felt out of place. He looked through her. To the lion, she was just another speck of dust in the machinery of the city. He didn't notice the way her knuckles had turned white against the handle of her basket, nor did he hear the frantic hammering of her heart. He reached the car at 5:59 p.m., 1 minute left. The world was on schedule. The world was under control. Jaya's world was measured in the weight of honey crackers and the distance between the scuffed toes of her shoes. At 8 years old, she had learned that if she stood perfectly still, she became part of the architecture, a gargoyle in pigtails that the giants of Seoul never bothered to acknowledge. Her mother always told her that her ears were her greatest treasure, a gift from the cold Moscow winters of Sujin's youth. "Listen to the wind, Jaya," her mother would whisper. "It tells the secrets people think are buried." But today, the wind was silent, choked by the heavy exhaust of idling engines. Jaya stood less than 5 feet from the sleek black sedan, her basket clutched against her chest. To her left, Lim Tae-sung, the guard with the face like a stone wall, stood at a rigid attention. A man in a long black coat, his skin the color of old parchment and his eyes like flint, drifted toward him. This was Dmitry Volkov. To anyone else, they were two professionals exchanging a final security check. Then the air shifted. "VSC Gotov," Dmitry murmured. "Is everything ready?" The language hit Jaya like a physical blow. It was the tongue of her mother's bedtime stories, but here, stripped of warmth, it sounded like the grinding of bone. Lim Tae-sung didn't turn his head. His gaze remained fixed on the hotel's revolving doors, but his lips moved in a sharp, clipped Russian. "Duh, pod voditlam, distanchanoi upravleniai." Yes, under the driver, remote control. Jaya's breath hitched. She knew those words. Vodital, driver, upravleniai, control. "Kogda on otkriat diver, bum," Dmitry added, a ghost of a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "When he opens the door, boom." The Russian operative checked his watch, the silver casing glinting in the fatting sun. He looked directly at Jaya, but his eyes didn't register a child. He saw a prop, a bit of street clutter that didn't understand the lethal poetry being spoken over her head. He nodded once to Tae-sung and began to melt back into the crowd of the Grand Regency's sidewalk. The silver-streaked lion was stepping through the lobby doors now, his stride rhythmic and inevitable. Jaya looked at the car door, the heavy, polished handle that would act as a trigger. She looked at Lim Tae-sung, the man supposed to protect the lion, who was now stepping back to give the explosion more room. The stopwatch in Kangjun's head was ticking toward 6 o'clock, but in Jaya's head, the only sound was the echo of that final word. Bum. She had no status, no power, and a voice that had never been heard above a whisper in this part of the city. But as the lion's hand reached out toward the metal handle, Jaya realized that the invisible girl was the only person left with the power to stop the clock. The digital clock on the hotel's exterior marquee blinked a cruel, neon red. 5:44 p.m. Inside the lobby's velvet-lined silence, Seo Kangjun offered a final, bloodless handshake to the investors. The deal was done. To them, it was a merger. To him, it was a conquest. He turned away before their smiles could even reach their eyes, his mind already calculating the transit time to his next destination. He lived his life in these small, stolen increments of efficiency, a man who believed that if he controlled the minutes, the years would never dare to betray him. 16 minutes, Chairman, Hyun-woo whispered, appearing at his shoulder like a loyal shadow. "The route is optimized," Kangjun asked, not slowing his pace. "Green lights all the way to the district office. Analyst Minkyu has cleared the GPS path for any anomalies." Kangjun nodded, his expression a mask of silver-streaked indifference. He was a man who moved through a world of friction as if he were made of glass. Behind him, the glass doors of the Regency reflected a city that feared him, a city he had built by removing every person who had ever slowed him down. 5:49 p.m. Outside, the humidity had thickened into a suffocating shroud. Jaya watched the lobby doors with a wide-eyed terror that made the honey crackers in her basket feel like lead. She looked at Lim Tae-sung. The guard was standing perfectly still, his hand resting near his holster, the picture of professional vigilance. It was a lie. He was a ticking clock in a tailored suit. She tried to move forward to catch the eye of the younger security analyst, Young Minkyu, who was busy tapping at a tablet near the lead escort vehicle. He looked kind, or at least less like a statue than the others. But as she took a tentative step, a heavy hand landed on her shoulder, not T-Sung, but a junior guard's, cold and dismissive. "Move along, kid. No selling here today. Clear the path for the chairman." "But the car," Jaya stammered, her voice thin and reedy against the roar of Seoul's evening traffic. The Russian man said. "I don't care what he said. Move." 5:54 p.m. 6 minutes left. The elevator chime echoed from within the lobby, a herald of the Lion's arrival. Kang-joon was stepping into the light, his silhouette framed by the opulent gold leaf of the hotel entrance. He looked invincible. He looked like a god of industry. Jaya watched him, her heart hammering a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. She was a ghost, and the god was about to walk right through her into a coffin of steel and fire. The digital clock on the marquee shifted with a silent, predatory click. 5:55 p.m. 5 minutes. To Seo Kang-joon, it was a window of time to review a ledger. To Park Jae-ah, it was the length of a fuse. She surged forward, her small sneakers slapping against the pristine granite of the hotel entrance. "Wait, please," she cried, her voice cracking as she aimed for Young Minkyu, the security analyst. He was the only one whose eyes weren't hidden behind dark glass, the only one who looked like he might still see a human being instead of a security threat. But she never reached him. A wall of black-suited muscle intercepted her. "Back behind the line," a guard growled, his hand a heavy, immovable bar against her chest. He didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, scanning for snipers, completely blind to the disaster standing at his waist. "The car is bad. The man in the coat, he said it in Russian," Jaya shouted, desperation turning her voice into a high, thin wail. She held up her basket of crackers as if it were a shield, or perhaps a peace offering. "Please listen to me." The guard's lip curled in a flicker of annoyance. "Kid, if you don't clear out, I'm calling social services. You're obstructing a state-level motorcade." He gave her a firm, dismissive shove. Jaya stumbled back, the wicker handle of her basket snapping. Honey crackers spilled across the pavement like golden coins, trampled instantly by the boots of the men moving into formation. She looked up at the line of guards. They were a phalanx of iron, a human fortress designed to protect the lion from bullets and blades. They were so busy looking for an army that they couldn't see the girl. Even Lim Tae-sung, the traitor, looked down at her with a chilling, empty smile, a look that said, "I see you, and you are nothing." 5:57 p.m. The silver-streaked lion was now only 20 feet from the curb. His stride was effortless, his focus absolute. He was a man who had conquered the city, yet he was about to be undone by his own arrogance, by the very wall of men he had paid to keep the world at bay. Jaya stood in the middle of the sidewalk, tears blurring her vision as the crowd of onlookers drifted away, sensing the tension. She felt smaller than she ever had in her life. She was a ghost, a speck of dust, an invisible girl in a city of giants. The weight of the secret she carried was crushing her. She looked at the car door, then back at the lion, and felt the cold realization sink in. Nobody was coming to help. If the world was going to be saved, the invisible girl would have to become impossible to ignore. The digital clock on the hotel marquee pulsed a final, warning red. 5:58 p.m. 2 minutes. To the men in tailored suits, 2 minutes was a transition. To Park Jae-ah, kneeling on the cold pavement amidst her crushed honey crackers, it was the distance between life and an explosion that would swallow the street. She looked at her scraped palms, then at the fractured wicker of her basket. For a heartbeat, the weight of her own insignificance nearly pinned her to the ground. She was a street kid, a ghost, a girl whose voice was usually drowned out by the roar of the Han River traffic. Then, she felt the phantom warmth of a hand on her shoulder. "Listen to the wind, Jaya. It tells the secrets people think are buried." Her mother's voice echoed in the chambers of her memory, steady and unbreakable. Sujin had survived the biting winters of Moscow and the grueling shifts of a street vendor by refusing to be small. She had taught Jaya Russian not just as a language, but as a shield, a way to understand a world that didn't want to be understood. Her mother hadn't raised a victim, she had raised a witness. Jaya looked up. Seo Kangjun was now 10 paces from the car. The chief bodyguard, Baek Hyun-woo, was already reaching for the passenger door, his hand inches from the heavy chrome handle. Lim Tae-sung stood behind them, his face a mask of professional boredom, though his eyes were fixed on the driver's seat with a predatory hunger. Jaya stood up. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her stomach, but beneath it was the iron of her mother's legacy. She realized then that the guards were not a wall, they were a blindfold. They were so obsessed with status and protocol that they had forgotten how to see the truth right in front of them. She didn't run toward the guards this time. She didn't beg the analyst for a moment of his time. Instead, she took a deep, shuddering breath and locked her eyes on the silver-streaked lion. He was the center of this universe, the one man everyone was forced to hear. 5:59 p.m. The sidewalk seemed to go silent. The hum of the city faded into a dull thrum. Jaya didn't care about the badges, the guns, or the invisible line she wasn't supposed to cross. She saw the man, not the myth. She saw a human being seconds away from a fire he didn't deserve. She stepped back into the path of the motorcade, her small frame rigid. She wasn't going to be a whisper anymore. She was going to be a scream that the underworld could never forget. 6:00 p.m. The second hand of the marquee clock snapped into place like a guillotine. Seo Kangjun reached the rear door of the black sedan. The silver-streaked lion did not hesitate. He did not feel the prickle of intuition that usually served him so well. To him, this was merely the end of a successful day. Behind him, Lim Tae-sung shifted his weight, his hand subtly moving toward his jacket pocket where the remote detonator lay nested like a viper. Chief bodyguard Baek Hyun-woo gripped the chrome handle. He began to pull. "Stay away." The scream didn't come from a guard or a rival. It was a high, piercing, jagged edge of sound that tore through the professional silence of the motorcade. Before the security detail could react, a small, blurred shape darted through the gap between two idling SUVs. Jaya didn't go for the guards this time. She threw herself directly at the man in the center of the storm. Her small, frantic hand clamped onto the sleeve of Kangjun's charcoal gray suit. The fabric, worth more than her mother made in a year, bunched under her white-knuckled grip. "Don't!" she gasped, her face pale, her pigtails disheveled. The world stopped. A dozen hands went to holsters. Hyun-woo froze, the car door cracked open only a fraction of an inch, not enough to trigger the pressure sensor, but enough to let the cold air of the street rush in. Kangjun looked down, his sharp gaze falling on the child who had dared to touch him. His eyes were not angry, they were worse. They were hollow, filled with a lethal confusion. "Remove her," Kangjun commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. As the guards closed in to tear her away, Jaya looked past the lion, straight at Lim Tae-sung. She saw the flick of the traitor's thumb. She saw the Russian operative watching from the shadows across the street. "On Skazel, bum!" she screamed, the Russian words exploding from her lungs with a clarity that silenced the sidewalk. "Kogda on otkriat diver pod voditlam," he said. "Boom!" when he opens the door under the driver. The air in the plaza turned to ice. Kangjun's hand, which had been reaching to push her aside, arrested in midair. He knew that language. He knew those specific technical terms from his dealings with the northern syndicates. He looked at the little girl, then slowly, his gaze drifted to Lim Tae-sung. The guard's face, usually a mask of stone, had fractured. A single bead of sweat rolled down Tae-sung's temple. "Hyun-woo," Kangjun said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Step away from the door, now." The lion wasn't looking through her anymore. For the first time in his life, he was looking at the person who had just dismantled his clockwork world with a single, desperate sentence. The sidewalk of the Seoul Grand Regency had become a frozen tableau, the air thick with the sudden, metallic scent of impending violence. Chief bodyguard Baek Hyun-woo did not hesitate. He stepped between Seo Kang-joon and the car door, his massive frame a living shield. With a sharp, tactical hand signal, he split the security detail in two. "Min-kyu, check the chassis," Hyun-woo roared, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the crowd. Young Min-kyu, the security analyst, was already moving. He dropped to his knees on the damp asphalt, sliding a telescopic inspection mirror beneath the driver's side of the sedan. His hands, usually steady on a keyboard, trembled slightly as the mirror caught the glint of a taped-down receiver and a cluster of plastic explosives wired to the door's pressure sensor. "Device confirmed," Min-kyu shouted, his voice tight. "Don't move the handle. It's a mercury switch. Any further movement and we're all gone." At the same moment, the periphery of the motorcade erupted into motion. Across the street, Dmitry Volkov, seeing his perfect window shattering, turned to vanish into the subway entrance. He didn't make it 5 steps. 2 of Kang-joon's plainclothes outriders, alerted by the shift in the lion's stance, intercepted him with the clinical efficiency of a closing trap. They tackled him into the concrete, the Russian's long black coat fluttering like the wings of a fallen crow before he was pinned and silenced. But the real rot was closer to home. Lim Tae-sung, his face now a ghostly pale mask of failed ambition, reached into his jacket. He was too slow. Hyun-woo's hand was a blur, his fist connecting with Tae-sung's jaw with a sickening thud that sent the traitor sprawling against the very car he had intended to turn into a coffin. Before Tae-sung could recover, 3 barrels were pressed against his temple. The silver-streaked lion stood in the center of the chaos, his hand still resting on Jae-ah's shoulder. He didn't look at the bomb. He didn't look at the Russian operative being dragged toward a waiting van. His eyes were fixed on the back of Lim Tae-sung's head, a man he had trusted with his life for 6 years. The empire was shaken, not by the explosive, but by the silence that followed. Kang-joon felt the vibration of the city beneath his feet, the hum of thousands of lives he had always considered beneath his notice. He looked down at the small girl in pigtails. She was shaking, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps, her honey crackers crushed into the dust of his world. For the first time in 47 years, the stopwatch in Kang-joon's head had stopped. The precision was gone. The predictability was dead. And as Min-kyu began the delicate process of snipping the wires, the most powerful man in Seoul realized he was standing in the middle of a street, alive only because a child had refused to be invisible. Seo Kang-joon had spent his life in glass towers and armored rooms, environments where every variable was scrubbed clean. Now, at 7:14 p.m., he stood in a hallway that smelled of damp concrete and cheap laundry detergent. The silver-streaked lion felt monstrously large in the cramped corridor of the tenement building, his $1,000 wool coat brushing against peeling wallpaper. He stopped before a door marked with a fatting sticker of a yellow flower. Beside him, Baek Hyun-woo shifted uneasily, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster. "Chairman, this area isn't secure. We should have the family brought to the office." "No," Kang-joon said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to rattle the narrow walls. "I am the one who is out of place here." He knocked. The sound was too loud, too authoritative for such a fragile door. When it opened, he didn't see a tool or a variable. He saw Park Soo-jin, a woman with tired eyes and flour-dusted hands, her protective arm instantly sweeping Jae-ah behind her. The girl peeked out from behind her mother's apron, her pigtails lopsided, her eyes still wide with the residue of the evening's terror. "We don't want any trouble," Soo-jin whispered, her voice trembling but her stance unyielding. She didn't see a titan of industry, she saw a threat. Kang-joon looked past her into the small room. A single light bulb hummed overhead. There was a folding table, a stack of mended clothes, and a small Russian to Korean dictionary sitting prominently on a shelf. This was the laboratory where his life had been saved. In this tiny, suffocating space, a mother had taught a daughter to listen to the world, while he, in his penthouse, had trained himself to ignore it. He looked at his own hands, clean, manicured, and utterly useless in the face of the bomb. He had built an empire on the belief that the little people were the grease in the gears of his machine. He had treated the city like a ledger to be balanced. never realizing that the most critical entry was a child he would have stepped over without a second thought. "I am not here for trouble," Kang-jun said. He reached into his pocket, and for the first time in his career, his hand didn't emerge with a contract or a weapon. He pulled out the broken handle of Jaya's snack basket, which he had retrieved from the street. He knelt. It was a slow, agonizing movement for a man who had never bowed to anyone. He placed the fragment on the small table. "I was wrong," he murmured, the words feeling like glass in his throat. "I thought I owned this city because I controlled its money, but I didn't even know who lived in it." He looked at Jaya, and the ice that had encased his heart for 47 years didn't just crack, it shattered. He realized that his predictable world was a tomb, and this small, shivering girl was the only living thing he had encountered in decades. The neon lights of Seoul usually felt like a cold, electric cage to Seo Kang-jun, but today they illuminated a transformation. At 6:00 p.m. exactly, the same minute that should have marked his funeral, the heavy glass doors of the new brick building in the heart of the district swung open. There was no gold leaf here, no armed guards blocking the entrance, and no silent elevators rising to isolated penthouses. Instead, the air smelled of fresh cedar and warm honey crackers. Above the door, the sign was simple, carved in sturdy oak, the Jaya Park Center. Kang-jun stood on the sidewalk, his silver-streaked hair caught in a gentle evening breeze. He wore no suit of armor today, only a simple dark coat. Beside him stood Park Jaya, her pigtails tied with bright silk ribbons, her hand tucked confidently into the crook of his arm. Behind them, Soo-jin watched with eyes that no longer looked tired, her posture upright and proud. "Is it time, Chairman?" Young Min-kyu asked, holding a digital tablet. The analyst's role had shifted from scanning for bombs to coordinating after-school programs and linguistic heritage classes. "It is time, Min-kyu," Kang-jun replied. His voice had lost its dry ice rasp. It was grounded, resonant. "But don't call me chairman here. In this building, I am merely the gardener." He looked at the crowd gathered on the sidewalk, the street vendors, the delivery drivers, the invisible people he had once looked through as if they were glass. They weren't stepping back in fear today. They were stepping forward. Jaya reached up and tugged on his sleeve, a gesture that had once signaled a life-shattering crisis, but now simply meant she wanted his attention. "Do you think they'll like the library?" she whispered, pointing toward the wing filled with Russian and Korean literature. "They will love it, Jaya," Kang-jun said, kneeling so he was at her eye level. "Because you taught me that the most powerful thing in this city isn't a secret code or a hidden weapon. It's the ability to truly hear someone when they speak." He handed her the ceremonial shears. As the ribbon fell, the silver-streaked lion didn't check his watch. For the first time in 47 years, he wasn't worried about the next minute or the next deal. He was simply present, a man who had traded an empire of shadows for a community of light. The clock on the corner ticked past 6:01. The world didn't end. Instead, for the first time, it finally felt like it was beginning.